Okay, another morning, and it's spring of 1944 here, March, April. The turns are getting large enough that I wish I could break them up easier. The Japanese, especially these card play turns where a lot happens, Japanese played the Greater East Asia Coast Prosperity Sphere. This has put a bunch of fortresses into their force pool, which they immediately started using. And then in the delay box, they're going to get some troops, but and support units, but also the Japanese mandate marker. Now, the Japanese mandate marker is the thing I was talking about. When this comes into play, when it comes off the track, it gets placed here and kind of freezes Japanese victory points. They can't gain any more, but they've got that many. For the Allies to win on this map, let's say it gets frozen at 3, or since they're 1 away, it might happen at 4. For the Allies to win, they have to actually break that number. They can't just swing the tide around. And that's a very powerful choice. The opposite choice, the Haku Ichu or whatever, says, yeah, we'll just play this out as regular. And I couldn't see enough advantage to that, if any, to tell you the truth, to justify using that counter instead of saying, yeah, you gotta do real well. You gotta get an unconditional surrender, basically. Now, granted, normally I don't think the Japanese would be doing anywhere near this well. They'd probably be around here, I would guess. Maybe into that 3 box, in which case, yes, you do have to force them a little further, but, well, with no opponents in Asia, it's going to be really tough to push them over, I think. So, let's look at what they did. I mean, we see a lot of little fortresses a lot of the garrisons were turned into fortresses. Those are slightly more defensible. Maybe more important, it gives them the ability to get replacements. They were running out of counters. And it also frees up units that they can move around and maybe cover some of the detachments, and we'll see where they're doing that. They use some troop convoys, which they're hoping to get back fairly quickly, to say place something here at Palau. They don't think they can retake the things they've lost is really the problem. Taking things is an expensive proposition in this system, and it's not like you can just say, I have naval dominance, I can do this. Making an invasion costs you at least a month or 2 without being able to make another one, which is kind of cool. And then once you actually do make, if it's contested and there's a naval battle, there's a good chance it could be more expensive than that. And it could be more than just the 1 fleet or whatever that you had to commit. So achieving naval dominance is kind of hard in this game. And right now the Japanese have the edge. There's no question about that. But they don't really have the ground troops and the support and everything to bring into play the number of convoys to really take a lot of opposed places. They've got so much force here in Asia that they can't really commit, because, seriously, they should be able to take Iwo Jima back. But it's just painful for them to try to do so with the amount of forces they have committed in Asia. Okay, let's look at the European side, where the Germans played a production directive for jet fighters. And they got a roll on here that went to the directive table and ended up giving them a neutrals pressured, which got that Finnish Allied support out of the way. That's something they would rather not see as well. I mean, they would love to get something on their side, and they just don't think that's very likely. Maybe because I don't know the pace. Maybe there are cards that'll swing miners into the Axis camp still, but I don't think many are going to do that. Although once you start rolling on tables, you never know what's going to happen. So let's take a look at the British situation. See if we can get a decent view on that. Looks pretty good here, but it's so bright. Okay, so the Germans made an attack on London, and they're kind of swinging back to their Southampton port, giving up Bristol, getting their shipping from there, and trying to take London. If they can get London out of all of this, then they force the Allies to kind of dig them out of there, and they gained something. If they don't get London, well, the Allies still have to dig them out of Britain, but they didn't gain anything. They also, since they made Turkey a partnership country, well, they get an air force out of them. You know, they had to attack because of that, basically, because I didn't want to waste the air force. Kind of wishing that I made Poland my partnership country because I knew I could use that one. This is turning into kind of a morass, and the Turks lost a unit because of it. Of course, they're getting some defensive advantage off that air force, but I think the Russians have done a great job of countering whatever Turkey's gain, whatever the gain the Axis had from adding Turkey to the war. I always think of Turkey as a nightmare scenario. However, over here on the East Front proper, we have some interesting stuff going on, and yes, I'm using my shadow. First of all, the Germans managed to make a breakthrough here with the Romanians into the Ukraine, and that's going to cause the collapse of this line. They also made attacks here that weren't as successful. In the north, they're punching holes through. Remember that supply failure? Well, they look really overextended, and maybe they are. I'm kind of worried what the Russians might be able to do back, but if they aren't, they're really carving out a space, getting them close to Moscow and able to take it. And if they can chase this headquarters away, Leningrad becomes a lot more possible. They took Minsk before, and now they're exploiting that into Smolensk and downward. And they're making some good headway here. However, they are a little extended, and we're going to see if they have to pay a price for that, because the Russians might well be able to do a really nasty counterblow here. All right, on to the Allies. So for the Allies, we see a couple of things here. Operation Avalanche was played over in the Japanese, in the Asian theater, and it's not triggered immediately. This is something where if an American unit ends up in an Axis minor power city, that country kind of can collapse and lose its forces temporarily. Well, in order to do this, we're pushing an infantry unit over here to Darwin, hopes of maybe landing in the Netherlands, East Indies. Get rid of that, and if they can get to Surabaya, they can march forward. The problem with Surabaya is if you land there, that's within air range, and yes, the Japanese don't have a plane right now because there was an air combat, but neither do the Allies. Of course, the Allies are getting some more, and a surface fleet, so they might be able to pull this invasion off. We'll see. It seems like a worthwhile plan. They also made this attack here on Rabaul, which kind of failed. They used their paratroopers and some infantry. I think I had to cheat to move them there, and because I caught them here, and it's like they can't do that. Well, the hell with it. Okay, and they didn't succeed in taking the fortress. It was kind of a low odds shot. But they will be able to continue attacking it, perhaps. So they may get an improved chance there. Over in Britain, and yeah, I cheat like that all the time in my games. If I don't want to spoil my plans. We see the Americans are being shipped over, and I noticed another cheating that I did, this time on the Axis side, which is over here it says occupied France does not allow German standard convoy placement. Well, I had been using that to ship through Bristol, so those units actually probably would have been trapped and caught off. You know, mistakes get made up for by mistakes or something like that. Anyway, the Allies managed to cause a rout of the German units, a retreat through which caused everything to fall back, and the position on London is kind of less aggressive than it had been. And now it looks like the Brits are gonna and the Allies are gonna have enough forces to prevent London from having a real chance of falling. If it hadn't happened last time, it wasn't gonna happen. On to the Ruskies. Okay, for the Soviets, they were able to play the War Progress 2 card because they played the last one last year. They can only play one of these a year. They got nothing off of it. They might get something random at another point. It's really just a 0-point card they can play. It doesn't do a lot of good for them, but maybe some of the later ones do. And then here we have the Uranus reserves formed for Operation Uranus. And this gave them a pile of troops. We got in the delay box, which might be available by the next card draw, who knows. And then a decent amount of replacement points. Those, oh, you know, I forgot to take a replacement point over here in Communist China. Oops, wrong Communist China. I'll have to look, see if I can get the headquarters in place, because then I could start taking more next season. Over here in Europe, though, the main front, well, over in Turkey, let's go to a sideshow to begin with. The Russians made a little bit of advance. I don't know how safe this is, but they did see the German advances that were kind of risky turned out completely safe because the Russians had to pull back. The breakthroughs that happened in the south, as well as up here, the danger to Moscow, just getting a line that worked. Now, this line isn't great. It's not behind the defensive terrain they wanted to be in, but they didn't have enough troops left to hold the line that they were at. And in fact, they'd been pushed beyond it. It's hard to get troops into the line without cities in place. So there is some value to reserves in this game. It feels largely like you don't want reserves because... so think about in a Third Reich type game. In WIF 2, you kind of want this double line of troops snaking down so that breakthroughs are impossible. Well, in this game, you can't stop breakthroughs that way. If a unit breaks off the front line, it takes what's behind it with it. So there's no easy way to prevent a breakthrough. But because of that, it feels like, what the hell, I don't want reserves. Well, you do. Even if you get replacement points, it's hard to get things from cities up to the front line. Now, that may be what the logistics markers are for in some cases, here in the swamps and everything, where it's hard to get troops. But as it stands, the Russian line is getting a lot weaker than it was. And they weren't really capable of exploiting the position the Germans put themselves in. At least that was my judgment as the Russian player. The German player had been shitting bricks, there's no question. Alright, well, I'll check into the Chinese Communists, see if there's anything I can do for them. And I think there's some movement that I should be doing over here that I haven't been paying attention to. And then I guess we'll come back with the next turn, which unfortunately, at least for the Germans, is, remember, a mud turn. Once we slide to that... once we slide to that second spring turn, it's got weather, and that's kind of painful. There's also weather over here, and I'm not sure how that's going to affect the U.S. actions. It might make the planned actions impossible. I really cannot keep a grasp on the weather. It's so complex in the Pacific. Not just is it different from what I'm used to, which is one key aspect, but also there's all the complexity of a number of different weather zones. This is a much larger geographical area than Europe, and so the major prevalent weather patterns are much, there are more areas to worry about. So there's not just a simple pattern that there is in Europe. Oh, look, it's winter. Oh, look, it's spring. And the game's got a little bit of weirdness with the mud coming after a pause. There's this brief turn where the mud isn't there yet. That's a little odd to me. But I can get used to that. Europe itself is simple enough. But when we get to Asia, man, there's so many different patterns and they have so many effects and so much with the naval being a big part of the game and everything, it just makes it much more complex for me, and I end up screwing up a lot more. don't have a real solution for that, except that if I play more Pacific games, I may get more used to it. All right, so yeah, on to the next turn. So here in the second spring turn, well, over on the Pacific map, the Japanese begin their attack in Sinkan and continue converting islands into fortresses. On the European map, the Germans are reorganizing in England to position themselves for, I don't know, a defensive stay there, see what's going to happen. It's kind of painful because they're not going to commit more troops, but they've definitely got some good stuff there that they don't really want to lose, but they can't afford to get out easily. Then down in the Turkish front, well, we're kind of seeing this wheeling happening where the Russians are sliding over this way and the Germans this way. That doesn't look particularly good for the Russians. They can't afford to send enough forces to deal with either Tehran or Baghdad. So they're not going to gain anything out of it. And it almost looks like whatever advantage they may have had towards getting towards Ankara is going to go away as well. They're going to have to block things up maybe with this space. I think there was actually a casualty there, actually a trade-off Turkish for Russian. Over here, well, the mud mainly stopped the Germans. They've been able to conglomerate and make some of their larger units, get the Yugoslavs into play, and they still don't feel terribly secure here, especially with things like these armor units here. That's a big unit, but it's somewhat vulnerable to taking losses in that it's an armored unit. You don't want it to get attacked on its own. Same with this. I don't know if the Russians can pull one off, but if they can, especially with the mud, but if they can pull an attritional result off of some sort, it might be worth it, even if they lose 2 steps to the Germans losing 1, because their infantry really doesn't matter much to them. We're also seeing some of the German headquarters is improving in size, but no, there wasn't even an attempt to attack. I looked at the numbers. Looks like I've got some conglomerations where I could make decent attacks, but with all those Russian headquarters in play, it's really hard to get good odds at this point. The mud shift against you, no airplanes, it just wasn't happening. Alright, on to the Allied sides. So for the Western Allies, I may have completely bollocksed. I didn't get Operation Avalanche off, but I also may still have done things wrong, I'm not sure. Basically what I looked at was the Brits, I only have 2 British convoy units, so I couldn't do convoys from here, here, and here to move the US unit to where I moved the British unit. The British unit got in there by a surface fleet dropping the beachhead there. No big problem. But in order for Avalanche to take place and try to eliminate this unit, I said, okay, why don't I try this? And I launched a couple of carrier fleets to knock this out as a base. It's the only base that, and boy, that's why you don't want Port Moresby, right, to fall into the Japanese hands. It's the only base that was afflicting this zone. And if I could have removed that, I could have used my Navy to have landed, say, at Sarong, which would have triggered, or even Makassar, except that's within air range of this. Although that wouldn't have been a problem because the beachhead would have been launched from here. But if I launched it here, that would have gotten rid of this. I wouldn't have gotten into Java itself, but still, I would have been in a position where I at least eliminated that Netherlands East Indies piece. I didn't do that. It's not that big a deal. It's not that big a piece, right? It would have been a bigger deal to wipe out the Philippines' military, but they have a problem in that they don't have many cities. Their 2 cities are actually protected, so I didn't have much choice there either. Not that I could have gotten there. Anyway, we did have a big carrier battle over Port Moresby, and we see a bunch of carrier units in here. Now this is actually probably to the Japanese advantage, because they recover things quicker than the Americans do right now, which is one reason to hold off on doing this kind of stuff, but I can't help myself. All right. When I came up with a plan that might have worked, I just could not stop myself. I've still got to do Western Europe, and I still got to do the Soviets. Well, the Brits didn't attack back here, and over on the Russian front, well, they're just collecting their conditional event replacement points and trying to stop this, stoke up this line and make it possible to hold down here. A little bit of shifting again. Probably not in Russia's favor, but we'll see.